This is Keep Up. I'm your host, Cynthia Dill. It's Friday, January 30th, 2026. I'm in my Cape Elizabeth studio. I'm going to do a show on the latest deal coming out of Washington, D.C. to avert a government shutdown, thanks to no other than our Senator, Susan Collins, and what that might mean for her Democratic opponents. And I'm also going to talk about how we might parlay some of that deal making into decreasing and stopping enhanced gender affirming care here in Maine. And what I mean by that is I have pitched to Maine elected leaders who heard Tuesday night from our governor, Janet Mills, that $2.25 million of state funding is in the budget for so-called family planning by agencies such as Planned Parenthood and Maine Family Practice, which is I'm all for. However, on the condition only, in my view, that we end the enhanced gender affirming care for pediatric uh, medicine because it's pseudoscience. So, first, there's a primary going on in Democratic politics as to who is going to challenge Susan Collins, our United States Senator who has been down in Washington now for 5 terms as a Republican, the only Republican from New England, a moderate. And Susan Collins last time around was challenged by a well-funded, very well-liked Democratic opponent who raised a gazillion dollars, like spent, I don't know, it was 40 million or something. And Susan Collins, despite all the polls saying she was going to get smoked, she pulled it out by 10 points, close to 10 points. So she's up again for re-election, facing a daunting election again. And the backdrop for Senator Collins' politics in the Republican Party is also quite interesting because she was one of 6 Republicans who voted to convict Donald Trump, the leader of the Republican Party, her party, and didn't vote for Donald Trump, and actually is kind of on his shit list, but not really. I mean, he occasionally makes a dig about Senator Collins, but the bottom line is she's able to work with the White House, and so the attacks against Senator Collins around the ICE agency coming into Maine like thugs is I don't know a story of just political good luck and there's never a dull moment. And what I'm referring to is a lot of the focus, of course, on the ICE enforcement has been on Minnesota because of the tragic deaths there, most recently of the 37-year-old nurse, Alex, what is it? Alex Preddy? Um, I'm sorry that I'm spacing his name, but what I'm not spacing is his heroic act of bravery in putting himself between an ICE agent shooting chemicals and a woman. So, of course, not only was he killed in line of duty protesting for these brutal immigration tactics being used by federal officers, but he was you know a gallant gentleman, just the kind of guy we need in society. So he was gunned down by ICE officers and caught on video. And so all eyes, for the most part, have been on Minnesota. And then, of course, Tim Walz stepped. It's, but meanwhile, here in Maine, my home state, it's not only been freezing here, but we've had ice up to the gazoo as well. Horrifying tales of brutality and just Bush League police tactics, as our sheriff said. Just to give you a few examples, one ICE officer pulls this guy over, breaks his window. He's a lawful United States, he's in the United States lawfully, gainfully employed as a professional at a company and has no criminal record. So he was like pulled out of his car. They left the car running. This is Maine in the middle of January. We're in like single digit temperatures. Why would you need to bust a window and leave a car running? It's such a Bush League police tactic, but even more horrifying are the stories of, a man who had a young baby in the car, then busted the window. Someone here lawfully, I might add, someone here lawfully without a criminal record, someone gainfully employed, contributing to their society, a father, uh, removed from his car, window broken, baby inside, like tiny, tiny baby. So they break the window of the car. The mother and the baby are totally traumatized. Thankfully, people around them took care of them. And I have a client, um, who has a family member, um, a 16-year-old girl stopped, guns pointed at her head through the window of the car, demanding that she roll down the window or they'll bust the window open. And she does, and she hands them her driver's license, and the ICE thugs see that she was born in the United States. So they, let her go, but the so we've had a terrible time here in Maine with ICE, not good at all. Like, really no good outcomes. Businesses have closed because employees can't get to work. Kids are not going to school. It's horrible, appalling. And what the Democrats have been doing is protesting, calling, everybody a fascist. And what our senator did, Susan Collins, who I might add is the chair of the Appropriations Committee, and before Saturday's shooting of Alex Pretty, there were 6 funding bills on track to go through the process to fund the government before it shut down, fund the government for the rest of the fiscal year through September. And this might sound like, oh, you mean this? Wow, the Congress is actually doing its job, but it is quite an achievement given the past shutdown drama. So everything was lined up perfectly to get these spending bills over the threshold when this shooting took place, and the whole surface of the political landscape just shifted drastically. There was all of a sudden this huge fault line that Democrats were not going to cross, and they had the wind at their backs in terms of popular opinion because everybody who saw the video was shocked and appalled. This is not America. This is not what we voted for, and this has to stop. So, that Saturday changed everything and gave some Democrats some leverage to say, no, we're not going to fund the government if this, butchery is taking place before our very eyes, and our communities are being terrorized. We're not going to do it. Good for them, and and good for Susan Collins because she's the one who actually kind of put together a deal to decouple the 5 spending bills that don't have anything to do with ICE or Customs and Border Patrol, and get agreement that we can still fund these bills, but we'll separate the one bill that contains the ICE funding, and we'll give it a temporary 2-week period in which we can work on, you know, reining in this agency. Bye-bye, Dan Bovino. Don't let the door kick you on the way out. Hopefully, Holman, Trump's guy, hopefully he can calm things down in Minnesota. But here in Maine, Susan Collins picked up the phone and called Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and she took the call. And this is my point, okay? The title of this podcast is Susan Collins, Our Power, because that's what we have in Maine, thanks to Susan Collins. We have somebody in Washington who actually picks up the phone, makes calls, and people take her calls. The White House takes her calls. So she gets a promise from Noem to cease the enhanced ICE enforcement in Maine. It's the best thing that could happen to immigrants in our state. There's a huge sigh of relief. Now, there's a lot of work to be done. There's been a lot of trauma. A lot of civil rights have been violated. Sure, a few criminals have been round up, but for the most part, it was a nightmare. And we got word from our senator that it's over thanks to her making a few calls and cutting a deal in Washington. So, what was Graham Plattner doing? The Democrat who's in the shadow of Bernie Sanders wants to, go down to Washington and, I don't know, protest. I mean, just what we need, right, is more like unbridled testosterone raging in the halls of Congress instead of the hardworking, fair-minded, keeps her powder dry senator from Maine who is able to juggle. She's got the appropriations bills in the air. She's got ICE on the ground. She's got Noam on the phone. And Trump, he cut the deal. So people like Graham Plattner, who keep throwing around this fascist, they're fighting these fascist windmills. Everybody's a fascist. America now is under fascism. Let me just remind people what fascism is. It's a totalitarian, extreme leader, like, real, like somebody, a strong man. If that was the case, we would not have a senator in Maine who voted to convict him and still is able to get him on the phone and cut a deal. So that's why we don't have fascism. And that's why Susan Collins is going to get reelected, because she is our power. She is our power. Shelley Pingree. She's been putting out a lot of good videos. Okay. And I'm frankly tired of them, because what I really wanted to be doing is sitting at the table, working with somebody, trying to come up with some solution. And I'll tell you what, to just make a quick judgment about what ICE is doing and like describe it as unlawful, unconstitutional, a brazen act of, murder, all that. I would respectfully suggest, if the Congress people who actually believe that what, ICE is doing on the ground is a clear violation of the law, then why don't they should provide asylum in their offices. Welcome the local Maine people who are under threat of this unlawful thugs in your office. Offer a solution to the people who are suffering, not making videos, for Facebook. So, Susan Collins, our senator, cut that deal, and the Democrats, to their credit, okay, the Democrats finally, right? It seems we're able to negotiate something that was good. And so what I'm hoping now here in Maine, because so Saturday was the horrific shooting in Minnesota that changed the landscape and is, just tempered down, I think, the ICE craziness that's just been so bad. Trump he had a home run with securing the border, right? Everybody was, yeah, yeah, yeah. And this has gone out of control, and it needs to be put under control. And hopefully we're on our way. Hopefully there's 2 weeks that the Senate will work on the ICE funding bill to include protections for civil rights, body cams, no immunity, no masks. These are some basic things I think most people could agree on. And so hopefully we're going to get a deal out of the United States Congress. And that, like I said, all of that happened after the Saturday event in Minnesota. But what happened in Maine on Tuesday was the governor of the state gave her state of the state, the governor, who happens to be Janet Mills, a Democrat running in the primary against Graham Plattner to challenge Susan Collins for the seat in Washington. So she gives her state of the state address on Tuesday night and announces, among other things, that she's going to stand up to ICE. She's going to stand up to Trump. She's going to support essentially having a sanctuary city, making Maine we're not going to cooperate with ICE kind of thing. But what she also said, aside from the ICE, is that she's putting in her budget $2.25 million to fund so-called family planning agencies like Planned Parenthood and Maine Family Planning. Okay. And this is something that's controversial in Maine. And the reason why it's very controversial, because Planned Parenthood, although it does provide health care for a lot of people, I think they combined themselves with the other similar agencies and throw out a number of like 30,000 patients. So if that's true, that's a lot of patients. Okay. But what they also are is a gigantic political force. They have a political arm that gets is very well funded. They make contributions to almost all of the candidates, whether they're clean election or not. They get involved in almost all of the elections. They have a huge presence in the state house, and they're aligned with all of the other nonprofits that sort of fall into the same donor network. I mean, that's really what it's all about, is where the money comes from. And all of the money kind of goes up to, a couple big players. I mean, the Democrats have it, the Republicans have them. That's the world we live in right now, right? The oligarchy. And the little schmucks like us can't do much except vote. And, Janet Mills wants us to support $2.25 million of taxpayer money, of our money, to support Maine Family Planning and Planned Parenthood. And I say, we need to to cut a deal here, okay? If like they did in Washington, we need to decouple, like they separated ICE from the rest of the bills. We need to separate uh, gender affirming care from healthcare. Okay, because right now in Maine law, unfortunately, in the last legislature, there was this law passed that makes gender affirming care and abortion a legally protected right. So they're on like the equal playing field. It's ridiculous. And not only that, but there's immunity. There's a shield law for people who provide gender affirming care. And the travesty, if there could be anything worse, right, than somebody getting gunned down in Minnesota, a nice nurse who is out trying to save America, gets gunned down in Minnesota. The only possible thing that could be worse is our government sanctioning experiments on kids, surgical and like hormonal experiments on kids, pseudoscientific experimentation that leads to long-term sterilization, okay, long-term health problems, and and so I think the Democrats need to say to the governor, uh, we're not going to support this bill, this budget, this line item, unless we, cease enhanced enforcement of gender affirming care. Okay. Just stop it for kids. Because here's the thing, the main really point of all this is to protect the kids. And the reason why children are vulnerable right now in Maine, more vulnerable than I would say immigrants who are up against ICE. Children in Maine are vulnerable because our law sets a standard of what gender affirming care is based on an organization called WPATHs, which is it's from like across the pond, uh, and it has been since debunked as you know a, an activist group. Really, it's more about politics than science. It's not based on science. There's no medical review. It's not peer reviewed. And so we are subjecting our children to standards of care that have been produced by essentially political activists. It I urge everyone to read the WPATH files written by Mia Hughes, and it exposes a lot of what I'm talking about. And there's since been a lot of exploring of this group, WPATHs. They completely debunked, in my view. Okay, and there's no reason for Maine law to fund uh, an organization like Planned Parenthood with $2.25 million when some of that money is going to be used to provide gender affirming care, which is complete quackery, nonsense, and very dangerous to kids, right? We're going to, and the kids can get it without their parents' consent. And the providers of this experimental medicine are shielded from liability. On top of that, it's in violation of the recently enacted federal executive order and the rules that are being adopted to protect kids from this kind of malpractice. So let's use our power and let's kind of rein in ICE and some of the excesses and abuses that are really harming our children and our communities, and let's rein in the gender medicine, gender ideology that is doing severe and substantial harm and is not scientifically based and is not helping. And it's how Planned Parenthood uses our funds. I mean, let's face it. That's how they're going to use the funds, right? They provide gender affirming care for kids. They don't charge if they can't afford it, which most kids can't. Or they charge Medicaid for whatever things they can get the federal government to pay for. But if there's any left over, it's going to be paid for by the money that they get from the state. And I don't think as a state taxpayer, I should be funding the 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 surgical removal of healthy breasts of girls. I don't think my tax dollars should be going to children who self-identify, self-diagnose themselves, and then self-prescribe what they think they need. I mean, you read some of these reports and it's just heartbreaking that these kids are being told by adults that if they have these feelings of confusion, that somehow these drugs and these surgical procedures might help them when they don't know that they will because there's been no study of it. And it's more likely that they won't because let's face it, if you remove a body part of a 14-year-old, there's no going back. And these kids, how could they possibly be informed? How could they be informed that as a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 16-year-old, how could you possibly know whether you wanna have children? Some people know. I mean, some people know. They just know all along, but a lot of people don't. You change your mind, and what a heartbreaking realization for these young people who have been led down this primrose path by groups like Planned Parenthood. You just go on a Zoom call. "Oh, you don't feel like yourself? You think your body isn't aligned with your mind? Here's a prescription." And that's the gateway. So, uh, you know, this is what Democrats need to do to rein in the gender ideology and to take back, uh, you know, some of the power that they have given these organizations. Legal immunity for providing pediatric gender affirming care is, I'm sorry, it's worse than any ICE excess I have heard. Okay, you don't want ICE officers to be immune. I don't either, but I don't think if you give a kid a prescription that changes his life, you know, there's no going back. If you castrate a young boy because he has a gender identity of a eunuch, there's no recovery from that. And that might sound extreme, but that actually is part of the WPATH standard of care. That is a gender identity that right now is protected under Maine law. And if it's gender affirming care, well, then it's provided in part by these organizations like Planned Parenthood and family planning. They might just provide the hormones, the cross sex hormones, but that's all part of this deadly cocktail for our kids that has not been studied and that should not serve. This WPATH standard in our law should not serve as the standard of care for medicine in Maine. And so, if Planned Parenthood, who is going to administer this gender affirming care, wants $2.25 million of public money, I think the Democrats, the moderate Republicans, anybody with common sense and who cares about our kids, so everybody should time out the gender affirming care on kids in Maine. Okay, it's unsubstantiated. It's against federal law, and it really should not be paid for by the taxpayers. And there should certainly should not be immunity for people who administer this voodoo, right? This care that is described by the WPATHs outfit, from across the pond, this political activist group of trans activists who essentially just want, everybody to normalize their lifestyle. Um, the- I hope we see some movement on gender ideology in the state of Maine. And I would hope that Janet Mills and the Democrats and the Republicans could maybe come around to agreeing that at least for now, given the federal government's position on this, given the newest information that supports certainly halting all pediatric gender affirming care, all the news about the you know like fraud of the WPATHs. I mean, it's essentially a fraudulent organization because it's a circular group that has no basis to provide standards of care for medicine in the United States. It's just crazy that our main law is based on that. So that's my message. Our power is Susan Collins, and that's why she's going to win. And we should also use our power, like we just saw how she did it in Washington. Why don't we do that here in Maine when it comes to gender affirming care for kids? And that's it. Until next time, this is Cynthia Dill signing off. I hope you subscribe. It would be nice to get the subscription rates up to like 200. That's my goal for this year. All right. Have a great weekend. Stay warm.